Hello, V. Welcome back to the podcast. How are you?
Hi, Shay. I'm very happy to be back here because last time we had such a fun time talking about alchemy and van life. So I'm excited to be back here and share more of my journey. And I think it's a very interesting topic today, and it's quite important because it's relevant to what we're going through collectively right now. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to some of these lessons with your listeners and help them to really find freedom from within using the principles of alchemy.
Yeah, and thanks for coming back. It's a pleasure to have you. I really enjoyed our conversation last time. It was really cool and it was fun and it was deep and philosophical. So there were a lot of good things going. And today's conversation, finding freedom is, as you say, it's very pertinent to the current situation in the world. And I'm excited to hear, what you have to say and where our discussion leads. So tell me, what are your thoughts about it? Like, what have you been sitting with?
Um, it's recently just came to me. Actually, I needed to share these principles because the journey that I went through is so relevant to in a smaller scale in just my own life, and it's just so relevant to everything that's going on right now in the world. We are being so restricted, and so I just thought that if I was able to overcome that, how can I take that lessons and quantify it and break it down in the simpler steps using the principles of alchemy so that I can help other people to actually find their own freedom as well. And that's what I did, and it's very simple. Um, but to apply it, of course, it can take some practice. And I think it's good that we, with this episode, because it's so connected to the previous episode that we talked about, but now it's more about the practical aspect of alchemy and how we can really apply it into our life and are seeing how um, the applicable aspect of each different stage and how you can actually apply that in order to help you gain the freedom from within.
Yeah. And I think it's very important to, go on to the sort of practical side of it because it's all fun, talking about theory and all that kind of stuff, but it's the real world hands-on experience that, people sort of look for and need in order to make those changes, right? But so I tell you what, how about we start off with just a general sort of discussion on when you say freedom, right? What does that mean to you?
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean in this context? Because it means a lot of different things to different people in different contexts. So let's sort of just, define our terms before we get going.
So to me, freedom is basically being free in all aspects. Like if you take to the root of freedom is about return to who we are and be free from the 3D reality. That's where you get stuck into suffering. Um, that's the reason why Buddha said attachment is suffering. So allow yourself to be free from attachment, and that attachment is basically the 3D realities, the paradigm that we think what it should be, but not necessarily that it has to be. And the way that we think is governed by our indoctrination, by the 3D society that has taught us over the years in our life. So freedom is the process of letting go of all of that so that you can return to your pure essential self. Me,
Right.
that's what freedom is. Yeah. But like in my lifestyle, I express this desire of freedom through travel. So to me, that is one way to utilize my freedom to express my desire to be free.
Right.
So my nomadic lifestyle.
Yeah. And it sort of is one of the, it's a sort of an archetype, situation of freedom where you've moved out of the sort of normal realm of society, in that most people spend all of their time in one place, just maybe doing different things, but really situated in a particular place, whereas you have this freedom of travel where you don't have to stay anywhere for longer than you don't want. You move as much as you want. There's no restriction on that. I mean, I guess there's some restriction in terms of like money and the weather and things like that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you can't really get away from the weather. It's quite hard to run from, but
Well, technically you still can. Like, I mean, if I want to, I can still go down south
that's true.
to avoid the cold to avoid the cold weather in Canada. But
Yeah, one step at a time,
yeah.
it's a lot more difficult that way. But yeah, so I mean, I guess this freedom that we're talking about it's really this inner sense of freedom, right? Where you feel free to be alive as you wish to be, which is complicated, because it's something that I think that everyone has this, like, I don't know about everyone, but certainly me and the people I know have this intrinsic desire to, be that way and not feel conditioned and pressured and stuck in a situation that they don't want to be in. And it's not about, not doing anything. It's about doing what you want to be doing and feeling. I suppose it's more important is it's the feeling that you want, right, of your experience of your life. But you haven't always felt this way, right? I mean, it took you a while to get to this point.
Well, yeah. So it's more like a spiritual freedom. It's or another way that it is like the freedom of the mind. Because I see that the reason why a lot of people are having issues is because they're being restricted to being themselves. Because in the cases that I know, because they've been restricted of being themselves, and there's so much pressure and there's so much stress in their life, and that's the reason why they develop mental issues. So it's the freedom in this sense is more like the freedom of the mind. It's the spiritual freedom to allow yourself to be free, who you are, like you said. And because when I was little, I always have the desire to be free, and I didn't understand why. I thought that I just wanted to escape, and I wanted to explore the world. But now that when I understand alchemy and able to connect the dots and the patterns of my life, like I can see and I can understand, why I desire freedom so much. Because that's part of me is like I wanted to escape the reality, the suffering reality. Because we human are so conditioned to suffer. Well, if in some level, in some way, but that suffering and difficult times is what you have to learn, experience that help you to grow and evolve as human, evolve your soul through the enlightenment stage, right?
Right.
And so that's the path of freedom that have to go through. Like everyone have to like return to their own essential self, like the pure self, and that's the reason have the suffering, we have the difficult times, because without any of that, we can't grow. But then we have to accept that these are the challenges that push us to grow and not to suppress us. So it's all about the perspective and how you look at things. But of course, for some people, especially our society right now, that the concept of freedom is more financial freedom, because it's very materialistic driven. Like you said, like a lot of people don't have this concept about freedom. A lot of people don't even know what freedom is. And it makes sense, because for some people, they do not value the freedom, but for them, it's a different value, like families or comfort, or like love relationship. We all have different values, but if we dig down to the core of values, where it's actually root, it will always take us back to either study or that spiritual freedom that we really want. Because in even if your value is family and a relationship, you want to be free to be who you are in order to be in that relationship. So it will always root you back to, if you dig deeper in your value, in your desire, it will always root you back at that level, that core level of your desire and what it is. Then from there, if you just keep following that path, it will lead you to your self-realization as your path of growth or your path of healing. So not necessarily that you have to obtain freedom like I do, go traveling, but it's just my way. It's just my way of understanding freedom and healing, because it's what works for me, not necessarily that everyone has to value freedom in that way. But underneath it all, the spiritual freedom that we all really want, because we all want to go back to our sense of self, because that's where we can obtain the true happiness, right?
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, right? Where the sort of conventional freedoms that people talk about, it's like those are stepping stones to the inner feeling of being free to do or be, who as you are. I mean, like the financial freedom side of things, it's like, yeah, you want financial freedom, but what that means is you don't want the burden of responsibility of having to earn money to have food and have a place to stay, and because that's the society we live in, and you can't really get away from that, but you can change how you sort of perceive all of that, right? And what's interesting is, to me, is that like how so much of it is just how we think about our own situations, where we essentially entrap ourselves in these sort of ways of thinking and being and doing, and then we don't like it, but we might not have the insight, or the situation isn't quite right to sort of look within and be able to adjust our belief systems and change how we see and understand things to sort of move into a different way of being, right?
Yeah. Like, well, and because when you look at the way our society actually function right now, that financial freedom that we all want to be rich and we all want to be successful, right? But is that also driven from the higher self, or is that driven from the negative ego also? Because what have been driven us is from the negative ego, right? Because like, I just want more status. I just want more fame, want to be rich. Like you said, I don't have to take responsibility for anything else. So it's selfish in a way, because even by that negative ego, and that's why it's the materialistic freedom, and that's the illusion that we think that we get. And that's how, because we have been functioning that way, that's the reason why we are in this global crisis, restrict ourselves from having that true freedom, because the negative ego would be like driven out of fear, and fear of loss. We're afraid that we are going to lose everything, so we try to hold on everything, and we're afraid that there won't be for anyone. So that's why we are hoarding all of our resources, and we are not sharing. And we think that is, but that is actually driven by fear, and fear is contractive energy. So the more it constricts, the more we're being restricted. So that freedom that we think we're getting is actually an illusion, because not an expensive energy. But if we allow ourselves to look at freedom in a way of everything is enough, that we're not afraid of losing our resources, and we're not afraid of not enough money, then we have enough for everyone. And so that's the expensive energy. So that would be able to expand ourselves. That's how we're able to have more freedom within our zone and within the world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it depends on like the two wolves, like which one is we feeding it to, right? So because being driven so like by fear, and that's clearly by the ego, and that's the reason we have to let go of that control of that paradigm. And that brings, actually discussing right now, it brings us to the first step of alchemy, right? That I was going to discuss how we're going to get ourselves into the freedom, to let go of our old and outdated idea what freedom really is, so that and allow the new sense of freedom to actually emerge and let us on the right path, achieving that true freedom. But yeah, we have to let go the the old image, the old paradigm, old indoctrination that's no longer working, in order to set us on a different path. And
Yeah.
so that's the first step, alchemy, right? The calcination, have to let burn or let go of everything that hold you back. And the way that I see it is, the first thing is that old concept of what freedom really is. And still a lot of people that you have to be rich, and you have to have a higher status in order to be free, be successful, because that's the way that we have been conditioned to understand what success really means. Like, to us, successful is all about like having big houses, fancy car, and having a prestige, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's all driven by status, right? And so that's how we understand freedom. And that freedom connect to how we conceptualize what success really means. And so that's why the whole society is driven down that path.
Yeah. So I guess if we look at it from like, an individual perspective, it's kind of like, if I'm understanding what you're saying, it's like, well, we have this drive to be free, right? That comes from, deep within. However, the way that, most of us have been brought up and, what we've learned in our societies is that, well, that freedom equals financial success, high status, all that kind of so-called material side of things. And then, the continuous striving for that and even often attaining that doesn't produce that free sense that, you were hoping it would by achieving it, right? Or it's an endless battle that doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And what's interesting is that, and I think you mentioned this earlier, is that it's like suffering does appear to be an intrinsic part of our reality, at least at the moment for humans, right? And it is the suffering that leads us to look for other ways of being, because the way we're doing things doesn't work anymore, right? Or it's causing too much pain and suffering. And so it's not that suffering is itself, I mean, it's kind of complicated, right? Because you want to say suffering's bad, which it is.
Bad, yeah.
It's bad, but it's like,
even like
it's the opposite of good, right? It's part of the balance.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's like bad or also depends on your own perspective also. So it's like nothing is good, nothing is bad. Even like there's a yin and everything has to be balanced. So to say the yin is bad because it's the dark side and the yang is good because it's part, then but one cannot function without the other. So even so, if we don't have the suffering, then we wouldn't know.
Yeah.
So that's why we come to experience suffering in order to come to know ourselves, right? To learn and to evolve, because without it, we can't evolve. So how can we go higher without all the lessons, challenges that we have to go through?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like, if I think about it like in terms of my dogs or whatever, right? Where you look at the life of a dog and they don't have the same kind of suffering that we do. I mean, they go through stuff and they get sick and there's challenges and, things happen to them that challenge them. But for the most part, they're very just peaceful, chilled creatures, just happy to be alive and be around, right? And so they don't have the suffering, but at the same time, they don't have the kind of experiences of being a human and being able to create, magnificent things in the world, or explore and understand and, gain perspective. And so that part's missing too. So it's like, well, if you want one, you got to have the other, right? Or you don't have anything.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or you don't have anything and you just settle out in the middle.
Like a tree.
Yeah.
But because they have different consciousness.
Sure.
Lower level consciousness. And that's the reason why they have lower level of suffering. But everything has soul, because everything is energy, even the tree, right? So if you speak something to the tree, it's better than you speak negatively to the trees. Yeah. So everything has consciousness, but it's at different levels. So like, in the Hermetic teaching, like if the law of rhythm and the law of vibration, it says if you look at the pendulum, it's the farther it's going to the right is the same distance is going to the left. So it's like the higher consciousness that we have, the more challenges that throw at us in order to what's on the other side. So I think it's the same principle there when you said everything has to have its balance. It's going to be out of balance.
Yeah. And what's interesting is how like some religious and spiritual traditions over the ages have sort of embraced that to mean, well, you must put yourself through suffering in order to attain, spiritual elevation. which
Mm-hmm.
is probably not the smartest way of approaching it in my humble, stupid, uneducated opinion, but it doesn't seem like a good idea. Like, I understand the premise of it. Similarly, I guess you can sort of extrapolate and say, like, well, if you want to be physically fit, right, and you want to be strong, well, you got to work out a lot. And that's in itself a kind of suffering, right? You got to push your body to its limits, and then it starts to repair and get stronger. But you do have to do that.
Yeah.
So there is some element.
No pain, no gain.
Yeah, no pain, no gain, for sure. So there is some truth to it, but it's like, how does one navigate that successfully without, doing it too much in one direction? I guess it's a personal balance that you sort of have to find, right?
It is a personal balance, and that's the reason why alchemy comes from, because the rhythm, it can be pretty high up and it can be pretty low. Goes lower, it will also go. So our goal is to be in balance, to be in that stillness, right? Much from the other side, so that you swing too far, not too much to the right, so you swing too far to the left. So it's all about letting our weight, letting go of our weight, so we can be lighter, so we don't swing as much, right? So that's why we have to be always stay and maintain in the balance. And even if it's swing, it would not be far off, and so you don't suffer too much. But in that balance is where you can see all the happiness and the joy, but not too far that you would go into the suffering. And but even if you let yourself like too far off to the left side or to below, when you grow enough at a certain point, you always know how to get yourself back to balance. And that's the beauty of alchemy, right? Because it teaches you to be always in balance. It's also something that I learned minimalism as well. And that's the reason why they said less is more, in a sense. More like in materialistically more, but the more that you let go of anything that you don't need, is a lot lighter, easier for me to travel. There's less thing that I have to take care of, so it freed me more time to do things that I want to do and not thinking about cleaning all it. So that sense of balance, and so letting go of everything that doesn't serve you is so tremendously critical in the stage of alchemy, and that's why it's the stage of alchemy, right? To let go and to burn down on that materialism, and because you're gonna need that to be in in the later stages.
So we spoke about practical, advice at the beginning of this episode. So in terms of how you would sort of guide people to do that process of letting go of those things that don't serve you, like, what's the best approach, or what's some of the approaches that one might take?
So of course, like for me, speaking in my experience, the internal guidance, intuition was actually what helped to let go of that materialistic approach paradigm that I cling to. Listen to your heart and knowing your passion. That was the number one that I learned to help me let go of all of the materials paradigm. Your heart will always know. It will always guide you to the right path, right? So that's what I did in my experience, and having the to listen and to tune into that, um, to uh, to take a leap of faith, the courage to take a leap of faith, going into the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
So that take us to the second stage, the second step, that embracing the unknown. So your intuition is gonna guide to be away from the path that is not working for you, and it's not something's gonna happen, or there will be a voice in your head to tell you, if you really want to obtain this freedom, then you have to let go of that old indoctrination or way of thinking in order to go on and path something else. So that would be always the first thing. And to me, like, following that internal guidance, um, and picking up on the synchronicities that so that it can guide you to be
Mm-hmm.
right path. And having the courage is so essential in order to do that, because it's so scary to go on a different path that you failure to.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so that's take us to the second step, being fluid, being adapt. So the second stage is all about um, this solution. This solution is like of water. Like, we have to embrace the unknown and be flexible and be adaptable with um, uh, this the current circumstance. So that we can see, we are like water, and we are fluid, and we are adaptable.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we're gonna find our freedom
Yeah.
later on. But courage is like the connector between the first and the second step,
Yeah.
to get there, because it's very scary to go into the unknown, knowing what the outcome would be.
Yeah. And I think that's a really excellent point about courage being so fundamental, because it is scary to make big changes and to follow a voice that might be telling you to do, something that no one else around you is doing or might be happy with. Not recommending people do anything stupid or dangerous, but this sort of intuition that we're speaking of is more of the guidance towards fulfilling, what fulfills you. I mean, that's not an eloquent way of saying it, but it's about, what feels right to you, just within yourself, and that does take courage, because it is scary, especially venturing into the unknown. I mean, that's arguably why, most people don't change when they could, is because they'd rather remain in the relatively unhappy place that they are now, that they know is the case, rather than risk the unknown, which may be better, but it may be worse,
Yeah.
as our mind tends to imagine it would be, right? And so we sort of evaluate this weird risk reward ratio. And then what's interesting is that at some point, the suffering gets too much, where you're like, it doesn't matter if it's not going to be worse than this. So I'm going to do something different and change anyway, right? It's almost like if you don't get out yourself when the suffering is small and it grows and grows and grows, I mean, eventually it's going to happen, right? And then you just will have to take that, because there's no other place for you to go but forwards or different, but it's a scary thing, and it does take a great deal of courage, and it doesn't change necessarily. You just get better at being courageous, right? It's
Exactly.
not that you do it once and then it's over.
Yeah. I mean, like, the more I've experienced, the easier it is to take the leap of faith and have that courage. But yeah, like you said, like if you don't take that leap of faith, it's everything is gonna build up because you're gonna keep running into the circle until like it's too much. Like this is enough. That you hit
Yeah.
the boiling point. Then until then, that you would make the change because you're so ignoring of all the signs and all the messages that like why everything is, but it's because we are being very ignorant as well. That's the reason why we have a lot of global crisis going on. But is like intuition would have to go along with discernment also. Like it's not, discernment will help you to distinguish like, oh, what's good and what's right.
Mm-hmm.
Using your intuition. So those have to go hand in hand, right? So it's not like courage or take the leap of faith into danger. So you like it's you have discernment to know, is that gonna kill you? You think that
Yeah.
about, is that gonna kill you, or is that gonna be like a possibility for something that is than what you have right now? For me, being in a blank slate, certainly it was a lot easier for me to that leap of faith because I had nothing to lose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
um,
It's interesting how that happens, right? Where sometimes you don't even get to make the choice. Like I interviewed a woman on the podcast a few months ago who she wrote this wonderful book called How Losing Your Job Could Be the Best Thing That Ever Happened to You, right? Her name is Eleanor Tweedle, sorry. And it was just a fascinating account of how, you know, what seems to be and this happened to you too, to almost exactly the same degree, where, you know, you lost your job that was causing you so much suffering, but you wouldn't have quit on your own probably. And yet, as devastating as that is at the time, which it is, because your world starts to feel like it's crumbling from underneath you, right? And that's it's not a fun experience by any means. But what's interesting is what comes after that and what opportunities are now open to and for you, because you don't have to hold on to this thing anymore because it's been taken from you rather than you letting it go, right?
Yeah. So that's is all about like going to the unknown, right? Because it's like a dark zone. It's a dark, don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And because you don't know, that's where all the possibilities are. And so that's where you get the chance to new things. So it's really all up to you, your mentality, how you take that unknown, whether you see it as a scary place or you see it as a sea of possibilities in order to grow some out of it. So that's where the discernment come from. You have to know the difference and have the right mindset and perspective in order to utilize this stage and to make it work for you.
And do you think that takes practice?
Certainly, yes. I think it's more than practice is having the awareness in order to have the right mindset to get through that stage, because that mindset is going to help you to be more flexible and more adaptable, to be more fluid, that you can maneuver through on the cracks of that unknown in order to create possibilities, the outcome that you want to create.
Right. And and it's all about like taking baby steps, right? I mean, you can jump in the deep end if you want, but that's might be a rough ride. But, you know, it's like cultivating this sort of inner intuition, whether, you know, you do it through meditation or a yoga practice or something like that. Usually it's some sort of involvement of learning to be silent right? And listening
Exactly. Yeah.
listening to what comes from within, which isn't easy for most of us because we've never really been taught how to do that because, our parents and grandparents, no one's ever really done that. I mean, maybe a few here and there, but it's not the primary mode of existence in our current world, right? But it's actually becoming a lot more popular, which I think is a consequence. The whole mindfulness movement and meditation and yoga is becoming very, very popular. And I think that's a very good thing. And I think it's in response to the increased amount of mental suffering that people are facing, where more and more people are looking for a way out, right, to end the suffering.
Yes.
And to have a better life that they sort of intuitively know is possible for them, right?
And that's the reason why we're having this discussion, which the message out there, right, to reach as many people as possible, just so that they know there's solution out there, their own suffering. And it's really up to each individual how they want to check and whether they are ready to be on the journey also. Because sometimes I see that when people are not ready, the message will not come to them. Even there's messages or there's solutions there, they want to perceive it or understand it in order for them to get out of it, unless they are ready.
Yeah. It's weird how that happens. I mean, it's happened to me too, where I've like bought a book or something like that and I've read it and I was like, yeah, okay, it's fine. And then I put it down and I forget about it. And then a couple or a few months or years later, something just sort of goes, read that book again, see what happens. And all of a sudden it has this like significant impact, whether it's a mindset change or something just clicks or feels right, and it all of a sudden takes you in a direction that you need to go, but that I wasn't, and one might not be ready for the first time. So it's very interesting how that happens. Eh?
Yeah, it's all about the divine timing. It's like your soul knows when you're not. It's when you're ready to go on that journey, like it's really gonna push you. Of course, you still have the free will to go against it, and that's why you suffer.
Yeah.
The more you keep going against it, just gonna suffer. That's why we have to be fluid. We have to be adaptable and be acceptance of our circumstances, well, in order to change. But so
and also that change is inevitable, right? Which is something that most people struggle with, myself included, because we don't like change for the most part, because change is very unpleasant and it forces us out of our routine and habits, and it's not very nice. Even if the change is for the better, the transition period isn't great. Not always, and sometimes it's a lot worse than others. It depends whether the change is benefiting you or compromising you or whatever it is, but that transition period is very difficult, and so most of us will avoid it for the most part. And yet the world is changing, or the whole universe is changing and evolving all the time. There's no way around it, right? And so for me, it's like, if I can adopt the mindset of like, okay, shit's going to change, right? Regardless of whether I like it or not. Now, I can either be on board and just go with the change and make the best of it, or I can, try and fight the mountain or the river, try and stop the river flowing, I think is the analogy that's often used. It's you'll just tire yourself out and get frustrated instead of hopping on a boat and just sailing with it, right?
Yes, exactly. But so that's your choice, right? Whether you want to go with the flow or you go against it. The more you go against it, the more you suffer.
Yeah.
So, but often we don't see that flow of life, that river of life.
Yeah.
That's why we go against it, because we are just stuck we're just so stuck with our way of thinking. We just think
Yeah.
this is the only way that right. We're not being open enough to see different perspectives. So yeah, it's, and like this universe is also holographic. So many different ways to look at things, and every angle is right. So in every way that you see it, um, like the cylinder, right? If you in one way it's a rectangular, in one way you see it's a circle, but like if you go higher up, then you're gonna see it as a cylinder. So
Yeah.
there's many different perspectives. So it's like we need to learn to be more open-minded, that there are other paths and other perspectives. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why we need to be adaptable and flexible. Um, and so that brings us to the next step, right, which is the separation. So how are we able to maintain our balance and be flexible and adaptable? We would have to separate ourselves from that all that toxicity, from negative thinkings, negative people, toxic news, like bad environment.
Hmm.
So because if we don't, just gonna like take in all the bad energy and you just get us way down, and we cannot go for. It's like even on the stage two, that you are the flow of life, but if you keep collecting too on the river,
Yeah.
you're just gonna sink down.
You'll sink right out. Yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna sink down. And so you need to separate yourself from all of that trash, from all of that toxic, which is the can be the external environment. Like I said,
Yeah.
it can be the news, or toxic people, toxic way of thinking, in order to keep us alive and clean, so that we can transition to the next stage. So that's pretty important as well. Otherwise, you won't be able to go forward.
Yeah.
Um,
But that's often quite a difficult thing to do, right? And you can have the intention, that you don't want to, have negativity in your life, but the reality is it's really hard to avoid most of the time, particularly if you're stuck in, difficult situations with people or jobs or things like that, where you can't just disconnect, especially if it's been your way of thinking for your whole life, right? I mean, your mind is just going to go straight there, right? And so, oftentimes, people will talk about how, there's a whole movement of positive thinking, right? And positive
yeah,
psychology and things like that, and affirmations and things. And it's like, well, those things are very good, right? And they can be helpful. However, they don't discount. I mean, if you discount the negative side of it, if you can't just ignore it or suppress it. You got to kind of deal with it in a healthy context, right? So it's
yeah,
not that you're running
yeah,
away from it or shoving it down, because that's just going to come back up
yeah,
in some different way.
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
really about learning how to manage your negative emotions and thoughts in a way that's, let's say, understanding, non-judgmental and like compassionate towards yourself, right? Where you
Yeah,
acknowledge the reality of it, you understand where it comes from, and that most probably it's not your fault in the way that you think it is. You were just trying to do what was best at the time, which is not an easy thing to know ahead of time. Usually, we make decisions in the moment. And then, to be kind to yourself about it, because as soon as you start, being critical or judgmental or self-reproaching, then you're just bullying yourself, essentially. And that's not going to help you much either.
yeah,
It's going to make you feel
yeah,
worse,
exactly.
potentially, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that takes a lot of practice as well, and again, the awareness.
Yeah.
In to help us detoxify ourselves. So if you can't like disconnect your external environment, we have the meditation in order to help us unplug. And that is how we're able to separate things, like separate ourselves and have that just for ourselves, like to cleanse our thoughts, our energy, to be balanced state in order to help us maintain the right mindset and the healthy mindset forward as well, and not being affected or influenced by other people. But yeah, our biggest um, gesture is always ourselves. We are the person who judges ours the hardest. So it's this is the reason why this stage is all about learning, like all the personal development in order to help you get through, like detoxify your mind and start to change and yourself in a healthier mindset. So you're gonna need a lot of tools here and a lot of meditation in order to separate ourselves from the previous, from our previous self, actually, not just from the environment, from other people, but also separate our new self to our old self in order for us to go to the next level. And that's the reason why this stage is called a separation. Because some is starting to emerge at this stage, and you will start to feel like you are you will start to have a sense of different person and different being at this stage. And so it's very critical to do meditation, to learn tools like even hypnosis, like affirmation, in order to get you through with that, so to separate yourself and help through that process.
And absolutely, and it requires a tremendous amount of patience and compassion, right, to do it effectively, because it's not an overnight thing. I mean, it didn't take you one day or a week or a year to get to where you are now, and so it's not going to take that amount of time to undo all of the doings, right? I mean, it's probably less time, but it's a slow process. But what's interesting about how we sort of, how our attention works, where typically, when we're having a thought, let's say, we're pretty much engrossed in that thought. And so we sort of completely identify with the thought. And so the thought represents a total reality at that moment, right? And we believe it to be true. And fair enough. Like, if you sort of doubted every one of your thoughts all the time, you would be a walking mess, right? You wouldn't be able to do anything, because how could you trust anything that you think? So it makes sense why we do, just take our thoughts to be true. But the process of, decentering, as it's sometimes called, or separation, as you were saying, is being able to basically take a step back or remove your attention by one order of magnitude, not order of magnitude, by one step backwards, to be able to see your thought in the context of a thought. And that's when you're able to start to do things, right?
Yeah.
It's observing the thoughts.
Yes, exactly. When you observe it, then you will start to see how it affects your feelings. And because it affects your feelings, it affects your action. Action becomes your reality. So it's that's why meditation is so critical at this stage, in order to help us be more and observe our thoughts, our action. And that's that. And the karma that we have done, we are going to create as well. So it is a very difficult stage, because is you would have to have the drive to be better, to seek for knowledge in order to change. Because if you don't, you're still gonna like be on that river and flow forever. You're gonna go back to the first stage.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's essential to seek for that knowledge. What's gonna help you to navigate through that river. And like also that because we have so many teachers, we have so many different modalities, it can be very confusing to know what is the right place to learn, the right person to listen to, or the right book to read. So this is where you also have to use that that you learn from the first stage and apply it again here on this stage, the third stage of this to to help you find the right path, the right teacher, the right knowledge that you need to know to help you grow through that stage, to help you with that separation, the right teacher or the right meditation even. For me, it was not even, I started with mantra meditation, like all the meditation were just so difficult.
Yeah.
I couldn't just like, it was really boring. So it just to sleep. I could not control my mind or like even absorb my thoughts. But even so with mantra, like even if it's not about observing, but it helps you to focus to that mantra only. And sound has a healing and it can really cleanse your energy. It has an impact on your aura, and that's how it helps you heal. So as we go through the stages, we also increase our intuition in order to help us navigate what's right and what's wrong for us, what's the right modalities that to take at this time, and pay attention to the synchronicities that happen as well, because often that is the help. Actually, I see synchronicity as help. It's like
Yeah.
an omen from the universe that's kind of got like go here, like listen to this message or listen to this podcast, watch this video. It's gonna like give you some insight that's gonna or the knowledge that's gonna help you with what you are seeking, or
Yeah.
the question that you have is gonna help you. So pay attention to those little things is so critical,
Right.
because that's gonna give you on the right path.
And I think that what's interesting there as well is how it also requires a level of, let's say, faith. I don't know that there's a better word, right? Both, maybe trust, but it's similar sort of word. But it's that sense of, trusting firstly yourself and your intuition and your inner guidance, right? That will lead you to better and better things. And that's not easy necessarily, but that's one of the components. But on the same line, it's also a faith in the universe, right? Or in God, or in some sort of higher power, whatever you want to call it, to know that, the synchronicities mean something, let's say, because without it, you just don't see it that way. And it's, this is not a sort of a debate about whether God exists or not. It's just a matter of like, in the paradigm that we're speaking of, that's one of the components, is to have this trust that there is something greater, and that this greater thing is a supreme good, let's say. And so where that guides you is really what is best for you, right? Or where you feel yourself being guided. I mean, it's different ways of saying the same sort of thing, right? But that's also not really how we are sort of, raised to live traditionally. I mean, to some extent, a lot of people are, I guess, but
and that's the reason why for alchemy is go from stage to stage, because in the first stage, that's why it breaks you down and it requires you to change your perspective, because of that open mind, it is easier for you to get to this stage where you learn to trust and you learn to be more excited that there's that this universe is a lot bigger and a lot mysterious. That's still a lot we don't, and just allow that to guide you. And so that's why you have to go through the first two stages to understand all of these principles, to have all of the experiences in order to have this internal guidance and to guide you through this stage. So that's why it has to be like there's a structure that you have to go stage by stage.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I think that trust that develops with openness, right? Once you have gone through those two stages, because you have to be open. I mean, it comes sort of at the same time, the trust and the openness, right? Because if you're open to new things, it means you're trusting that there's a possibility for something good to come out of it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be open to it. It would be madness, to be open. But that it just does sort of come that way, right?
Yeah. So as you can see, a lot of lessons that you learn in each stage, but these lessons are there for a reason, because you need to carry on to later stages, which require a lot of persistence and inner drive in order to get to that level of freedom, right? Because that's why they call it the hero journey, because it requires the courage, the and to listen to the heart and learn to know the omen, know all these video, know the internal guidance, and have that open mind to trust and to surrender. So yeah, it's really not easy, but it is possible, because many people have already achieved it, and we are at the place right now that we're just gonna keep suffering, so we have to, so it's really push you to be regardless. And I'm like, whenever I hear stories about people that changing their trajectory, their old job anymore after the pandemic, I'm like, that's good for them. They go on a different path and they try something new. They follow their passion. I'm like, yeah, that's the way to do it. Like, something has to change if we want the world to change. And so it's the only way for us to be open-minded at this time, to get a better outcome.
Yeah, and that change comes from within, right? Like, the first thing you got to change is yourself. It's very difficult to make significant good change in the world without it first coming from within. Otherwise, how do you know what you're doing is good or bad, right? Or not good or bad, but helpful or unhelpful, let's say.
And so when we are to get through with the separation, this is the time that when we actually separate ourselves from that sense, that also this is the time for to basically utilize whatever sense of freedom that available to us and make the most of it. Right? So for me, that was the time that I travel because that's how I express my freedom, right? So everyone have different way to express, either being themselves or drawing, being artistic, or writing. So utilize all that freedom that you have, and to build the foundation for the better stage, the later to get to that ultimate point of freedom. Because if we, when we are able to realize or make the most of the freedom that we have, it will allow us to be to have the feelings of free. And when we have that feelings of freedom, then we will be able to make this energy out there to the universe, and that's how we get it to reciprocate back into our. So at the way that I did that, so in my example, right? So when at the time that I was in Vietnam, because I loved traveling, and I wanted to be a know being a Vietnamese citizen, because I cannot travel around the world, but there's certain places that I go. So I make the most of my time, of my traveling time in those places. I can actually travel to and learn to see the beauties from it and make the best experiences. And for me, that was Southeast Asia, and it was the only place that I could travel to without a visa, right? And I was able to find that path of freedom. I was able to build foundation, sense that I'm not afraid anymore. Like no matter what happened, I'm okay being here. So that would take us to like the fermentation and the, right. So now we are at the conjunction when we utilize, when we separated ourselves, and now we utilize the senses to create a better foundation. And so that's how I created mine. So it's like, even if I cannot travel to US, I cannot travel to Europe, but where can I travel now? That's my way of expressing freedom, right?
Yeah.
And I'm out, and my mentality was like, I'm just gonna make the best time out of these countries, and they're just to explore. Even like just only a couple of years, not just, it's not enough to explore everything. And my mentality, if I cannot go anywhere else, if I have to get stuck here, then I'm just gonna spend my life exploring these places and make the most of it. So that to bring to the next stage of the fermentation, to let go of the control of the future.
Right.
Okay, so because we can get stuck in controlling, because controlling is actually, and the more you control, the more you're afraid. So controlling is driven by the fear of loss. You're afraid you're not going to get that. And so when you're driven by that fear, then you're going to bring that contracting energy back into your life. That's how we manifest and attract things, right? So that's why it's critical to know of that control, what that future would be like, but instead allow the future to emerge from where you are right now at this stage, when you create your foundation at exactly where you are. So the lessons of here and now is very critical for the conjunction state. So you have to understand, you have to be in the present to make the most of your present, because that's the foundation you're going to the future, but you have to let go of what that future is like and allow that future to emerge on its own with this foundation. Because that's why future and the past doesn't exist. We only exist in the present. So you can only build your foundation on the present. You cannot control the future. Um,
And you can't
so
change the past.
that's what. Yeah, we cannot live in the past and have that control your present, because you're not in the present. You cannot make the most of your present if you live in the past. And so that the fermentation is like, you have to have that inner passion and inner drive to guide where the future would be. So for me, that passion is traveling, but for you, Shane, it can be else, right? But you have to use that passion to create that foundation, because that's where you're gonna build your freedom.
Yeah, and cultivate it, right? Because it can be a slow process. And again, I think it brings us back to the point of courage, of having the courage to do that. And, you know, because it might not be what's the easiest in the moment or the most comfortable, but, you know, if it feels right, it's something that's worth pursuing. And yeah, I mean, the focus on the present is always just essential, as you say. It's all we have, right? And while I think, you know, it's probably reasonable to plan somewhat for the future, it's important to sort of keep an open mind about it and how it will go, and not try and force things to happen. I mean, even in the statement of building a foundation in the present, you know, that's done considering the future. It's otherwise there would be no point to build a foundation. You would just do whatever you want in the present just to gain the most pleasure, right? And that's not particularly helpful. But you're right. I mean, it's this weird like situation of balancing the present, setting you up for the future without having definite constraints on how that future must be, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And allowing it. Yeah.
It's not like you don't have a goal. So you still have to, but you kind of need to be okay with being in the present, no matter what going to happen to your future. You know, don't achieve that goal, you know, you're still going to be okay here. So in the distillation, you will learn that you're going to utilize all knowledge in order to help you to focus on this one goal, one desire, or the visualization, or using meditation, hypnosis, all the different tools in order for you to get there to the finish line. So that sense of future is there, but when you, in order for you to have that vision, create a vision or meditation, because that is driven by your passion, right? What you want to create in your also, and whether that desire is rooted in a positive ego or in the negative.
Right.
So the positive ego is like in a higher self also. So every stage that you need to be aware that you're not going to constrict yourself by that negative ego, so that you can only allow yourself to expand in order to go through and get to the finish line. And so if your mind think that the future have to be exact, and I'm afraid I don't do this, I won't be able to get there. So get into controlling mode, and so that's the part that we need to let go. But so in the distillation stage, you would have to know what is your desire that you want to build for your foundation also, and allow that to emerge. And so you that exercise like visualization or meditation or hypnosis or whatever in order to help you build that future. Look, but at the same time, you would have to let it go. You can't control it, right? So that's, but when you're able to have that feelings of being free, when you already have the foundation, doing meditation and doing visualization um, is because you will have a higher vibration when you have already have this sense of freedom. You will have a higher vibration, and that's the reason why you can manifest out of this high vibration and not being constructed in a lower vibration
Right.
through the mentality.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean, that you have to let go of the control and just allow that to take place. Oh, no matter what, knowing that you are still okay and you are still free here. So in
Yeah.
that sense, it is a little bit tricky to understand, but once you grab it, that is when you can actually manifest things, and that's why it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's manifest because you always have to be in that present, you know.
Yeah. And it's interesting that, like, it's also probably something that, there's never really a finish line. There's always going to be things
Mm-hmm.
that grab you, or that, so it's a constant process of being okay with, all of a sudden facing a fear that you have, or trying to control something, and then being able to say, oh, I'm doing it again, or whatever, and then work towards, releasing that control, or letting go of whatever it might be, and then not, making a whole story about that, oh, you're not at the place where you want to be, or all these kinds of things, because then you're just getting stuck again, right, in the future or the
Mm-hmm.
past, where in versions of you that you think should be the case that aren't. Whereas, to be fully present is to fully accept where you are now within
Mm-hmm.
the context of, the broader picture of things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so the way that I see that for the collective is that accept that we are in the pandemic now and that we have, and but knowing that we're still gonna be okay.
Yeah.
So you have to know that we are gonna be okay. We are gonna be fine, and utilize that as a foundation and do whatever you can to express your own freedom. If I can just travel within the province, then I'm fine. I'm gonna just explore whatever that I can see in the
Yeah.
province, and not into a different stage until everything is better, and keep myself on that stage of gratitude, keep myself on that stage in that place of balance, so that I'm not shifting into the stage of fear or that will go downward spiral into suffering, right?
Yeah.
And so, um, yeah, and because we know that when we are able to be in that balance is when we can build a better future as well. And when we are able to feel free and is it and not being afraid, um, that is when we can have more peace. And when we have that peace, uh, we won't have as much chaos in the world. And if we don't have that much chaos, then it's easier for us to come up with solution and not so much fighting and discriminate each other in order to find the better solution. But as we are all free and having more peace, it's just slowly going to ease up the restrictive energy in it as well. So
Mm-hmm.
things gonna start to be more harmonious, and solution is come up over time in order to open up the world more, and we have more peace.
Yeah.
So that is it is the place of trials and tribulations, right? And knowing that, yeah, we still make mistakes, but when we learn to utilize all the lessons and the tools that we have, to gain that uh, peace, that's why we have to give uh, like try. That's why I say trials and uh, tribulations have to keep trying, and the distillation phase is like going up and down, up and down. This means that you utilize already have and bring it down in a practical matter, and then try it again until that stage is completely perfected.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like you said, there is no finish line, like clear finish line. However, there's many mountains, so there's many there are many
Yeah.
peaks. So when you get to the peaks of that mountain, where you already obtained that freedom, it's important to recognize it, acknowledge it, and celebrate it, because that's where we're gonna find the confidence in order to keep next mountain, go to the next finish line, and keep expanding ourselves. Because if we don't get to that top, we don't get to that peak, we will have the confidence to expand,
Mm-hmm.
to keep going further, to go to the next mountains. And
Yeah.
so that's where the coagulation is. When you get to the victory point, to have that philosopher's that you have already accomplished this far, you have already climbed up to this mountain, then everything else is going to be possible. Everything else is easy. Um, so that's why I said in my last episode, right? Alchemy is forever changing, and there's so many circles,
Mm-hmm.
so many cycles that you have to keep going through, and there's point, but doesn't mean the suffering is forever.
Yeah.
Because you already raised your vibration, so the pendulum swing too much anymore. You don't feel like too much uh, uh, disturbancy anymore, but it's more like more in the balance, and things are easier
Yeah.
and more harmonious.
An easier flow. Yeah.
It's not too much
Ups and
go
downs.
up and down.
Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, this has been a fabulous conversation. Thank you. Do you have any sort of last thoughts that you want to add, or, any final messages for people?
Um, I think it has been a very long and interesting talk. So I just want to recap, right? So
Sure.
on we talked to, so like to obtain our freedom, like spiritual inner freedom. So the first stage is the calcination, right? So like of our own paradigm, our own way of thinking. And the second stage is the dissolution, to be fluid, to be to embrace the unknown, and have the courage to take the leap of faith to go into that unknown. Preparation is to detoxify ourselves, separate ourselves to to toxicity, um, the environment, toxic environment, the toxic people, and within our toxic self, our own self, that toxic to inner being, as well as to separate all of that. And the conjunction is where we utilize everything that we have in order to create a foundation, be here and now in this present, in order to the foundation, and make the most of it, and be free from here, so that we can create more freedom later on. Then the fermentation is to let go of the control of the future, so we don't get restricted what the outcomes would be, but let the outcome emerges from the foundation that we build. And then the distillation is to um, uh, just focus. The distillation is all about visualization, focus on that one goal that we want to achieve, which is the better freedom, higher freedom for us and for ourselves, for the planet. So when we are able to focus on that and do all of the exercises in the lessons already know, and using visualization, any kind of modalities that you know for manifestation, right? This is like that at the distillation, and the last stage is coagulation, the philosopher's zone. When we get to victory lie, it's important to embrace that, acknowledge it, and celebrate it, because if we don't recognize it, we would not be able to build the confidence to expand and to go further and reach further, to go to the next mile, and expand more freedom for ourselves and for other people. So that pretty much wrap up like the 7 stages, how you can actually use it in a practical manner in order to manifest and create more freedom in your whatever that you actually manifest. But I think it's essential for the world to understand right now that we can utilize these principles, wisdom, in order to help us to get through this pandemic, to be free, um, and to have more harmonious and unified world for the better future.
Yeah, that was a great sum up, I think. And I totally agree. And I think that there's a lot of good things to come in the world, despite the current difficulties, right? Where can people find you on YouTube, on social media, you know?
Yeah, so I have a website called Living Through Alchemy, the title of my book as well. So all the discussion that we have today and in the last episodes is very much related to my own story, how I walk through this journey of alchemy, my experiences going through these stages. And so you can check, it's on Amazon. Again, the title is Living Through Alchemy. And if you go to my website, livingthroughalchemy.com, social media contact is also on there as well. I'm active on Instagram and YouTube. So my Instagram is a smileyvv05, it's the smiley face.
Yeah.
And my YouTube is mainly for my van life, but I also share about my personal growth and the lessons and a lot of insights that I learned from my life experiences that I also share on YouTube as well. And it's called Personal Growth Through Van Life.
Great. Well, thank you again. I encourage everyone to check it out, buy the book. It's great. And yeah, I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you so much, Shane.
Take care.